The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as 12-year-old Dion walked home from school. His backpack felt heavier than usual today. Mrs. Patterson had assigned extra math homework and Coach Taylor had kept the basketball team late for practice. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that lunch had been hours ago. Dion took a shortcut through Oakwood Park, the same path he'd walked 100 times before. The familiar sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze usually brought him comfort after a long day. But today something different caught his attention. On a weathered wooden bench near the playground sat an elderly couple. The man had a tired, sunken face with deep wrinkles that told stories of a long, hard life. His faded blue jacket hung loosely on his thin frame. Beside him, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun held his hand. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and even from a distance Dion could see the sadness in her posture. Something about them made Dion slow his steps. They didn't look like the other elderly folks who came to feed the ducks or watch their grandchildren play. These two seemed lost. Dion's mom had always taught him to be aware of his surroundings, but also to show kindness when possible. "You never know what battles people are fighting," she would say. As he got closer, he noticed the man gently patting the woman's hand, whispering words of comfort that Dion couldn't quite hear. His hand moved to the lunchbox in his backpack. Inside was half a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and 2 chocolate chip cookies his mom had packed this morning. He'd been saving them for after basketball practice, looking forward to that first satisfying bite all afternoon. Dion hesitated for a moment. He was hungry, and Mom wouldn't have dinner ready for at least another 2 hours, but something in the slumped shoulders of the old couple tugged at his heart. Before he could talk himself out of it, Dion changed direction and walked toward the bench. As he approached, both the man and woman looked up, surprise flickering across their tired faces. "Excuse me," Dion said, his voice coming out a bit softer than he intended. "Are you folks okay?" The old man straightened slightly. "We're fine, young man. Just resting our feet a bit." His voice was warm but worn, like an old blanket that had been washed too many times. The woman offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's very kind of you to ask." Dion shifted from one foot to the other, suddenly feeling nervous. "I was just wondering—" "You looked like maybe you hadn't eaten in a while." The couple exchanged a quick glance, a silent conversation passing between them. The man's face flushed slightly. "We're just fine," he repeated, but his stomach betrayed him with a low rumble. Without another word, Dion swung his backpack around and pulled out his lunchbox. He sat down on the bench beside them, leaving a respectful space between himself and the old woman. "My name's Dion," he said, unzipping the lunchbox. "My mom packed me some extra food today and I'm already pretty full." It wasn't exactly true, but it felt like the right thing to say. "I'm Mr. Thomas," the old man said after a moment's hesitation. "And this is my wife, Mrs. Thomas. We've been married for 47 years. "Pleasure to meet you both," Dion said, the way his mother had taught him. He pulled out his sandwich and broke it in half. "Would you like to share my lunch? My mom makes the best peanut butter sandwiches." Mrs. Thomas's eyes widened. "Oh, we couldn't take food from a child?" "I'm not a child," Dion corrected automatically. "I'm 12, and I'm offering because I want to." Mr. Thomas looked at the sandwich half, then at his wife. The hunger in his eyes was unmistakable now. "Son, that's mighty generous of you, but please," Dion said. "My coach says I need to eat more protein anyway. Sharing is good for me." He held out the 2 halves of his sandwich. After another moment of hesitation, Mr. Thomas gently took 1 half. "Thank you," he said softly. He broke his portion in 2 and gave half to his wife. Dion pulled out his apple next, and his pocket knife, the one his grandfather had given him for his birthday, with strict instructions to use it only for food and emergencies. He carefully sliced the apple into quarters, keeping one for himself and offering the rest. As they ate, the park around them seemed to grow quieter. Dion had 100 questions, but didn't know if it would be rude to ask. Instead, he said, "Do you live around here? I haven't seen you before." Mrs. Thomas took a small bite of apple before answering. "We're just passing through, dear. We used to have a little house over on Maple Street, but—" Her voice trailed off. "The bank took it," Mr. Thomas finished for her. He said it simply, without bitterness, but Dion could hear the weight behind the words. "We've been staying with our daughter when we can, but she's got 4 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. So sometimes we just take walks," Mrs. Thomas added. Get some fresh air. Dion nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He knew about foreclosures from the news. His own mom had stayed up many nights at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, making sure their rent was covered. But to actually lose your home, that was something different entirely. "I'm sorry about your house," Dion said, because it seemed like the right thing to say. Mr. Thomas smiled at him, a real smile this time. "Life gives and takes, son. We've had good times and we'll have them again." Dion pulled out his cookies next. They were large and homemade, his mom's specialty with extra chocolate chips. He handed one to each of them without hesitation. Mrs. Thomas's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the cookie. "You're an angel, do you know that?" Dion felt his cheeks grow warm. "No, ma'am. Just doing what my mom would want me to do." As they ate their cookies, Dion learned that Mr. Thomas had been a carpenter for 40 years before. Arthritis made it too difficult to continue. Mrs. Thomas had worked at the local elementary school cafeteria until it closed down 2 years ago. They had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and even 1 great-grandchild on the way. "What about you, young man?" Mr. Thomas asked, brushing crumbs from his jacket. "What keeps you busy these days?" Dion told them about school, about how he loved science but struggled with fractions, about his basketball team and how coach thought he might make starting point guard next season if he kept practicing. "I used to play basketball," Mr. Thomas said, his eyes twinkling with the memory. "Never was tall enough to be great, but I could outrun just about anybody on the court." "That's what coach says about me too," Dion replied excitedly. "I'm not the tallest, but I'm fast." For a little while, the 3 of them forgot about their troubles. They talked and laughed, sharing stories as the afternoon shadows grew longer across the park. Dion learned that Mrs. Thomas could whistle any song after hearing it just once, and she demonstrated with the latest pop tune Dion had been hearing on the radio. Mr. Thomas showed him a magic trick with a quarter that left Dion genuinely puzzled. When Dion checked his watch and realized he needed to head home, he felt strangely reluctant to leave. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked, zipping up his now empty lunchbox. The couple exchanged another glance. "We might be," Mr. Thomas said carefully. Dion nodded. "I can bring extra lunch," he offered. "If you want." Mrs. Thomas reached out and patted his hand. Her palm was soft but cool. "You're a special young man, Dion. Your parents must be very proud." "My mom is," Dion said, slipping his backpack on. "My dad passed away when I was little." Understanding passed between them, an unspoken recognition of loss. "Then he would be proud too," Mr. Thomas said firmly. As Dion turned to leave, Mrs. Thomas called after him. "Be careful going home now, and thank you." "See you tomorrow, maybe," Dion called back with a wave. As he continued his walk home, his stomach growled again, but somehow he didn't mind the hunger as much now. He wondered if Mom would help him pack 2 extra lunches tomorrow. She might ask questions, but she would understand once he explained. What Dion didn't notice was the sleek black car parked across the street from the park. He didn't see the man in the expensive suit watching the entire interaction through the tinted window. And he certainly couldn't have known how his simple act of kindness had just set extraordinary events in motion that would change not just his life, but the lives of many others in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. But that part of the story was still to come. Dion couldn't stop thinking about Mr. and Mrs. Thomas as he walked the remaining blocks home. The small apartment he shared with his mom suddenly seemed like a palace compared to having no home at all. The weight of what the elderly couple was going through settled on his young shoulders, making him wonder what else he could do to help. When he pushed open the door to their second-floor apartment, the familiar smell of his mom's cooking wrapped around him like a warm blanket. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of her famous vegetable soup, her nurse's scrub still on from her day shift at the local hospital. "There you are. I was starting to worry," she said, turning to give him a quick hug. "Practice run late again?" Dion dropped his backpack by the door and nodded. "Coach is really pushing us for the tournament next month." He hesitated, then added, "Mom, can I ask you something?" She must have heard something different in his voice because she turned down the heat under the pot and gave him her full attention. "Of course, baby. What's on your mind?" Dion sat at their small kitchen table, his fingers tracing the familiar pattern of chips and scratches in the wood. "I met some people today. An old couple. They lost their house." His mom's expression softened as she sat across from him. "Where did you meet them?" "At the park. They looked hungry, so I shared my lunch with them. He looked up, suddenly worried she might be upset. Was that okay? His mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. That was more than okay, Dion. That was beautiful. Her eyes shone with pride. Tell me more about them. As Dion explained everything he had learned about the Thomases, his mom listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You know, she finally said, I think I might have some extra containers. We could pack them some of the soup for tomorrow. Relief and excitement bubbled up in Dion's chest. Really? You're not mad that I gave away my lunch? She chuckled softly. How could I be mad at you for having such a big heart? That's exactly what I've always tried to teach you. She stood up and returned to the stove. We might not have much, but we have enough to share. My mama always said that a blessing isn't really a blessing until you pass it on to someone else. That night, Dion helped his mom pack not only containers of soup, but also some bread she had baked over the weekend. They added apples, granola bars, and bottles of water. His mom even found an old thermos in the back of the cabinet that she filled with hot coffee. Now I want you to be careful, she warned as they packed everything into a paper bag. Not everyone out there has good intentions, but from what you've told me, these sound like good people who've fallen on hard times. They are, Mom, I promise. She nodded, trusting his judgment. If they're there tomorrow, tell them Martha from Memorial Hospital says hello. And if they need medical attention, they can come to the clinic. We don't turn anyone away. Dion went to bed that night feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope. He said an extra prayer for Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, asking that they find a warm, safe place to sleep. The next morning, Dion woke up earlier than usual. He helped his mom pack his regular lunch plus the extra food for the elderly couple. The bag was heavy, but he didn't mind. He imagined the looks on their faces when they saw all the food. Maybe they won't be there, his mom cautioned, trying to prepare him for disappointment, and that would be okay. It might mean they found somewhere to go. I know, Dion said, but secretly he hoped they would be waiting on that same bench. School dragged by even more slowly than usual that day. During math class, Dion found himself staring out the window, wondering if the Thomases had found shelter from the light rain that had started falling. During lunch, he sat with his friends but felt guilty about eating in the warm cafeteria while thinking about the elderly couple. His best friend, Tyler, noticed his distraction. You okay, man? You've been quiet all day. Dion considered telling Tyler about the Thomases but decided to keep it to himself for now. It felt private somehow, special. Just tired from practice, he said instead. When the final bell rang, Dion rushed out of the building, not even stopping at his locker. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. He practically ran the whole way to the park, the heavy bag of food bumping against his leg. As he rounded the corner to the playground, his heart sank. The bench was empty. Dion stood there for a long moment, the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. Had they moved on? Found shelter somewhere else? Or had something bad happened to them? Just as he was about to turn away, he spotted them. They weren't on the bench, but sitting under the large oak tree at the edge of the playground. Mrs. Thomas was leaning against the trunk, while Mr. Thomas sat protectively beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Dion's face broke into a wide smile as he jogged over to them. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, I was hoping you'd be here. They looked up at the sound of his voice, their faces lighting up with recognition and something else. Was that relief? Well, look who it is, Mr. Thomas said warmly. Our lunchtime friend. We weren't sure you'd come back, Mrs. Thomas added. She looked even more tired than yesterday with dark circles under her eyes. I promised, didn't I? Dion said, setting down his backpack and the paper bag. And I brought more food today. My mom helped me pack it. Mrs. Thomas's eyes widened. Your mother knows you're here? Dion nodded as he began unpacking the containers. I told her all about you last night. She's a nurse at Memorial Hospital. She said to tell you that if you need medical help, you can go to the clinic there. They don't turn anyone away. Mr. Thomas looked down, blinking rapidly. That's very kind of her. Dion pretended not to notice the emotion in the old man's voice as he continued unpacking. We've got vegetable soup. My mom makes the best soup in the world. And fresh bread, apples, granola bars, and water. Oh, and coffee. Mom said grown-ups always need coffee. Mrs. Thomas laughed softly, the sound like wind chimes. Your mother is absolutely right about that. As they ate, Dion noticed how carefully they handled each container, how slowly they savored each bite. It made him realize how much we take for granted when we know where our next meal is coming from. "How was school today?" Mr. Thomas asked between spoonfuls of soup. Dion shrugged. "Okay, I guess. We're learning fractions in math, but I don't really get them." "Ah, fractions." Mr. Thomas nodded knowingly. "I used to be a carpenter, you know. Couldn't have done my job without understanding fractions." For the next 20 minutes, using sticks and pebbles from around the tree, Mr. Thomas gave Dion the clearest explanation of fractions he'd ever heard. Suddenly, the concepts that had seemed so confusing in the classroom made perfect sense when applied to measuring and cutting wood. "You're a good teacher," Dion said admiringly. "Better than Mr. Wilson," Mr. Thomas chuckled. "Well, when you've been cutting lumber for 40 years, you learn a thing or two about measurements." As they finished eating, Dion noticed Mrs. Thomas shiver slightly. The air had grown cooler as the afternoon progressed, and her thin jacket didn't look warm enough. "Are you cold, Mrs. Thomas?" he asked. She smiled bravely. "Just a little draft, dear." "I'm fine." Without hesitating, Dion unzipped his hoodie and handed it to her. "Here, you can borrow this." "Oh, we couldn't possibly," she began, but Dion had already placed it around her shoulders. "My mom says it's important to stay warm, especially when it's been raining. You don't want to catch a cold." Mrs. Thomas touched the soft fabric gratefully. "Thank you, Dion. You're such a thoughtful young man." As they continued talking, Dion learned more about their lives. They had lived in their house on Maple Street for over 30 years. Mr. Thomas had built much of it himself. They'd raised 3 children there, hosted countless holiday dinners, and planted a garden every spring. "Our youngest, David, he's trying to help us," Mrs. Thomas explained. "But he's in the military, stationed overseas. By the time he found out about our troubles, it was too late. And we don't want to be a burden on our children," Mr. Thomas added firmly. "They have their own families, their own struggles." Dion thought about his own mom, how hard she worked to provide for him, how she never complained even when she was tired. He wondered what would happen if they ever lost their apartment. The thought made his stomach twist. "Where did you sleep last night?" he asked suddenly, then immediately regretted the question when he saw their faces. "I'm sorry. That was rude?" "It's not rude to care," Mr. Thomas said gently. "We found a shelter downtown, but—" He trailed off. "It was very crowded," Mrs. Thomas finished for him. "And they separate the men and women so we couldn't stay together. After 47 years, it's hard to be apart," Mr. Thomas explained, taking his wife's hand. Dion felt a lump form in his throat. He wished he could invite them to stay in their apartment, but he knew they barely had room for themselves. Still, there had to be something more he could do. As the sun began to set, Dion reluctantly packed up the empty containers. "I should probably head home. Mom will worry." "Of course," Mrs. Thomas said, starting to remove his hoodie. "No, keep it," Dion insisted. "I have others. You can give it back to me tomorrow." What he didn't say was that it was actually his only hoodie. But he couldn't bear the thought of Mrs. Thomas being cold through the night. As they said their goodbyes, Dion made a silent promise to himself that he would find a way to help them. Really help them. Not just with food and clothing. He wasn't sure how a 12-year-old boy could make much difference, but he had to try. Little did he know, the man in the black car was watching again today, taking notes and making phone calls. The wheels were already in motion for something that would change everything, not just for the Thomases, but for Dion and his mom too. What Dion didn't know as he made his way home that evening was that the man in the black car had been watching him for the 2nd day in a row. The man's name was Raymond Wilson, and he wasn't just any businessman in an expensive suit. Raymond had grown up in this very neighborhood 40 years ago. Back then, his family had lived in one of the rundown apartments near the train tracks. He knew what it was like to go to bed hungry, to wear shoes with holes in them, and to feel the burning shame of poverty. But unlike many who shared his beginnings, Raymond had managed to climb out. Through scholarships, hard work, and admittedly some good luck, he had built Wilson Enterprises, a company now worth millions. He had come back to visit the old neighborhood that day by chance, or perhaps fate. His driver had taken a wrong turn, and suddenly there was the park where he had played as a boy. He'd asked to stop for a moment just to look, just to remember. That's when he'd spotted Dion and the elderly couple. Raymond had watched the entire interaction, something stirring deep within him. When he saw the boy open his lunchbox and share what little he had, it struck a chord that resonated through his entire being. It reminded him of something he had long forgotten, the simple, profound power of human kindness. Now, as Raymond sat in his luxury hotel suite across town, he couldn't get the image out of his mind. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Mike, I need you to find some information for me," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "There's a boy about 12 years old and an elderly couple. They were at Oakwood Park today and yesterday around 4 p.m. May I ask why, sir?" Mike's voice crackled through the speaker. Raymond paused, not entirely sure how to answer. "Let's just say I'm working on a new community project. I need to find out who they are and what their situation is. I'll get right on it, sir." After hanging up, Raymond walked to the window of his suite, gazing out at the city lights. He had come back to his hometown for a business meeting, but now he felt like there was another reason for his return. Maybe it was time to give back to the place that had shaped him, for better or worse. Meanwhile, Dayon was sitting at his kitchen table trying to focus on his homework, but his mind kept wandering to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. His mom noticed his distraction as she folded laundry nearby. "You're a million miles away, baby. Still thinking about that couple?" Dayon nodded, pushing his math worksheet aside. "I just wish we could do more to help them." His mom sat down across from him, her eyes tired from her long shift but still warm with compassion. "Sometimes the little things we do mean more than we'll ever know. You've given them food, but you've also given them dignity and friendship. That matters, but they need a home, Mom. They need jobs. They slept in a shelter last night, but they couldn't even stay together." His voice cracked slightly at the end. His mom reached across and squeezed his hand. "I know, baby. The world isn't always fair. But listen, I had an idea today at work. There's a program through the hospital that helps find housing for people in need. I picked up an application for them." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and smoothed it out on the table. "Maybe you can give it to them tomorrow." Dion's face brightened. "Really? Do you think it could help?" "It might. It's not an immediate solution, but it's a start. They'd need to come in for an interview, but if they qualify, the program could help with temporary housing and job placement." For the first time since meeting the Thomases, Dion felt a flicker of real hope. "That's awesome, Mom." He jumped up and hugged her tightly. "You're the best," she laughed, hugging him back. "I just know good people when my son tells me about them." The next morning, Dion was up before his alarm, eagerly helping pack more food for the Thomases. His mom had made extra chicken and rice the night before, and they packed that along with fresh fruit and more water. Dion carefully folded the housing program application and tucked it into his backpack. "Now remember," his mom cautioned as he headed for the door, "this program isn't a guarantee. I don't want you getting their hopes up too much." "I know, Mom, but it's better than nothing, right?" She nodded, giving him a quick kiss on the forehead. "Much better than nothing. Now go learn something today, okay?" School seemed even more tedious than usual. During history class, Dion found himself wondering about Mr. Thomas's stories from his years as a carpenter. During lunch, he thought about Mrs. Thomas and how she had worked in a school cafeteria, maybe one just like this. By the time the final bell rang, Dion was practically bouncing with anticipation. He raced to the park, his heart pounding not just from the exertion but from excitement about the possibility of really helping the Thomases. When he reached their usual spot, his steps slowed. The bench was empty again. He looked over to the oak tree, but they weren't there either. A knot formed in his stomach as he scanned the park, looking for any sign of them. "Hey," a voice called from behind him. Dion turned to see Tyler, his best friend from school, walking up with his basketball under his arm. "You looking for someone?" Tyler asked. "Thought you had practice today." "It got canceled," Dion said distractedly, still scanning the park. "Coach has a dentist appointment." Tyler spun his basketball on one finger. "Want to shoot some hoops then?" "I can't right now. I'm kind of waiting for someone." Tyler's eyebrows shot up with interest. "Who, got a girlfriend or something?" Under normal circumstances, Dion would have laughed or shot back a smart remark. Instead, he made a split-second decision. "Actually, I'm waiting for these people I met. An old couple who lost their house." Tyler's spinning basketball wobbled and fell. "What, like homeless people?" The way Tyler said it made Dion bristle. "They're not just homeless people. They're Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. He was a carpenter and she worked in a school. They lost their house because of medical bills after he hurt his back. Tyler had the decency to look embarrassed. Sorry, man. I didn't mean it like that, Dion sighed. It's okay. I just want to help them, you know? My mom got this housing program application that might help them get back on their feet. Tyler picked up his basketball, suddenly looking thoughtful. That's pretty cool of you, Dee. Want me to help you look for them? The offer surprised Dion, but he nodded gratefully. Yeah, that would be great. They're usually around here somewhere. The two boys split up, circling the park in opposite directions. Dion checked all the benches, the picnic area, and even the small wooded section at the far end. After 15 minutes, he was starting to worry that the Thomases had moved on, or worse, that something had happened to them. Just as he was about to give up, Tyler came jogging over from the direction of the community center at the edge of the park. I found them, he called. They're over by the building, sitting on those steps. Relief washed over Dion. Thanks, man. I owe you one, Tyler shrugged. Want me to come with you? Dion thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, if you want to. As they approached the community center, Dion spotted the Thomases sitting on the bottom step of the building, huddled close together. Mrs. Thomas was wearing his hoodie, which made Dion smile despite his concern. They looked even more tired than yesterday. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, he called out, waving. They looked up, their weary faces brightening instantly. There he is, Mr. Thomas said, nudging his wife gently. Told you he'd come. As Dion and Tyler reached the steps, Mrs. Thomas stood up, smoothing down her skirt with dignity despite its wrinkled state. We thought we might have missed you by moving spots, but the sun was so nice over here today. This is my friend Tyler, Dion said, gesturing to the taller boy beside him. Tyler, these are the Thomases I was telling you about. Tyler, who had been hanging back slightly, stepped forward and extended his hand politely. Nice to meet you. Mr. Thomas shook Tyler's hand firmly. Any friend of Dion's is a friend of ours. Dion set down his backpack and began unpacking the food containers. Mom made chicken and rice last night. She sent extra for you. Bless your mother's heart, Mrs. Thomas said, accepting the container gratefully. And bless yours too, young man. As they ate, Dion introduced Tyler to the couple, and soon all four were engaged in easy conversation. Tyler, whose father coached Little League baseball, discovered that Mr. Thomas had once played semi-professional ball in his youth. The two launched into an animated discussion about famous players and legendary games. Watching them, Dion felt a warmth spread through his chest. There was something special happening here, something that transcended age and circumstance. These connections, these moments of shared humanity, felt important somehow. When there was a natural break in the conversation, Dion reached into his backpack and pulled out the housing program application. My mom works at Memorial Hospital and she found out about this program that might be able to help you. He handed the paper to Mr. Thomas, who adjusted his reading glasses to examine it. Housing assistance? Mom says it helps people find temporary housing and jobs too. You'd have to go for an interview, but she thinks you might qualify. Mrs. Thomas leaned over to look at the form, hope and skepticism battling in her expression. That's very thoughtful, dear, but these programs often have long waiting lists. It's worth a try, though, isn't it? Dion pressed gently. Mom says they're good people who really want to help. Mr. Thomas studied the form for another long moment before folding it carefully and tucking it into his jacket pocket. We'll certainly look into it. Thank your mother for us. As they finished their meal, Tyler surprised everyone by pulling an apple and a granola bar from his own backpack. I brought these for you, too. Not much, but Mrs. Thomas accepted the offerings with the same grace she'd shown Dion. That's very kind of you. Tyler, thank you. When it was time for the boys to leave, Mrs. Thomas tried again to return Dion's hoodie, but he insisted she keep it. It's supposed to get cold tonight, he said, trying to sound casual even as worry gnawed at him. You boys be careful heading home now, Mr. Thomas said, his voice carrying the natural authority of a man who had once been responsible for a crew of workers. As Dion and Tyler walked away, Tyler was unusually quiet. Finally, he said, They're nice. Not what I expected. What did you expect? Dion asked, curious rather than defensive. Tyler shrugged. I don't know. Not people like that. Not people like us. The simple observation struck Dion as profoundly true. The Thomases were just people who'd had bad luck. who'd fallen through the cracks of a system that didn't always catch everyone. What neither boy noticed as they left the park was the black car parked across the street, or the man inside it watching them with growing interest and a plan already forming in his mind. The next morning broke with gray clouds hanging low in the sky, threatening rain. Dion woke up early, his first thought of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas and whether they had found shelter for the night. He glanced out his bedroom window at the gathering storm and felt a knot form in his stomach. When he entered the kitchen, his mom was already up making breakfast in her scrubs before her early shift. "You're up with the birds today," she said, sliding a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Everything okay?" Dion poked at his eggs with his fork. "Just worried about Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. It looks like it's going to storm." His mom glanced out the window and frowned. "I've been thinking about them too." She sat down across from him, her coffee cup cradled between her hands. "Listen, I talked to my supervisor yesterday about their situation. The hospital has an outreach program that works with the homeless shelter downtown. If they go there today, they might be able to get priority placement because of their age." Hope flickered in Dion's chest. "Really, that would be great, Mom." I wrote down all the information. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "The name of the coordinator is at the top. They should ask for him directly." Dion tucked the paper carefully into his pocket. "Thanks, Mom, you're the best." She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "Just remember, baby, there's only so much we can do. The system doesn't always work as fast as we'd like." Dion nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. Don't get your hopes up too high. After breakfast, Dion packed extra food again. Peanut butter sandwiches, apples and cookies his mom had baked the night before. He also grabbed an umbrella and a plastic poncho from the hall closet. His mom raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "I might be a little late tonight," she said as they headed for the door. "Mrs. Johnson called in sick, so I'm covering part of her shift." "I'll make dinner," Dion offered. "Spaghetti?" His mom kissed his forehead. "Perfect. Be careful today, okay? And stay dry." School dragged by even more slowly than usual. Dion kept glancing out the window as the sky grew darker. By lunchtime, rain was falling steadily, pattering against the cafeteria windows. Tyler slid onto the bench beside him in the cafeteria. "Man, it's really coming down out there. Coach is going to cancel practice for sure." Dion barely heard him, his mind on the Thomases. Where were they in this downpour? Had they found somewhere dry to wait it out? Tyler followed his gaze to the rain-streaked windows. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" "The old couple," Dion nodded. "They don't have anywhere to go, Ty." "Maybe they went to that shelter your mom told them about." "Maybe." But Dion wasn't convinced. The shelter separated men and women, and he knew the Thomases didn't want to be apart. Tyler was quiet for a moment, pushing his tater tots around his plate. "You know," he finally said, "my dad has that shed in our backyard. The one he was going to turn into a workshop but never did. It's not much, but it's dry and has electricity." Dion stared at his friend. "Are you saying—" Tyler shrugged, trying to look casual, though Dion could tell he was nervous. "I could ask him, just for a few days until they find something better." The offer stunned Dion. He hadn't expected Tyler, who usually only cared about basketball and video games, to get so invested in helping the Thomases. "Would your dad really be cool with that?" "Probably not," Tyler admitted with a half-smile. "But he always says we should help people when we can. And Mom's always talking about what Jesus would do and stuff." He looked down at his lunch tray. "It's worth asking anyway." Dion felt a rush of gratitude for his friend. "Thanks, Ty, that would be amazing." By the time the final bell rang, the rain had turned into a full-blown storm. Thunder rumbled overhead as Dion and Tyler hurried out of the school building, sharing Dion's umbrella. "I'll call you after I talk to my dad," Tyler promised as they reached the point where they had to go separate ways. Dion nodded, pulling up his hood as Tyler dashed off toward his house. Then clutching his backpack and the bag of food, Dion headed toward the park, fighting against the wind that threatened to turn his umbrella inside out. The park was nearly deserted when he arrived, the playground equipment glistening with rain. Dion searched their usual spots, the bench, the oak tree, the community center steps, but there was no sign of the Thomases. Panic began to rise in his throat. What if something had happened to them? What if they'd gotten sick from being out in this weather? Just as he was about to give up and head home, Dion spotted a flash of familiar blue, his hoodie, under the small pavilion near the basketball courts. Relief flooded through him as he splashed across the soggy grass toward it. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were huddled on a picnic table bench under the pavilion's roof, their few possessions gathered close around them. Mrs. Thomas had Dion's hoodie pulled tight around her shoulders, while Mr. Thomas had his arm protectively around his wife. "Mr. and Mrs. Thomas," Dion called, hurrying toward them. "I've been looking all over for you." They looked up, surprise and relief washing over their tired faces. "Dion," Mrs. Thomas said, her voice hoarse, "you shouldn't be out in this weather, child." "Neither should you," he replied, setting down his backpack in the food bag. He pulled out the plastic poncho and handed it to Mr. Thomas. "Here. This might help keep you dry." Mr. Thomas accepted it with a grateful nod, but Dion could see that they were already damp, their shoes soaked through from the puddles that had formed on the pavilion's concrete floor. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, trying to keep the worry from his voice. "Just since the rain started," Mrs. Thomas assured him, though the weariness in her eyes told a different story. "We're fine, really." Dion began unpacking the food, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here. The pavilion offered some protection, but the wind was blowing rain underneath the roof, and the temperature was dropping as evening approached. "My mom talked to people at the hospital," he said, pulling out the note his mom had written. "There's a coordinator at the downtown shelter who might be able to help you get priority placement because of your age. She wouldn't have to wait on the regular list." Mr. Thomas took the paper, studying it through rain-speckled glasses. "That's very kind of your mother. And my friend Tyler, the one you met yesterday, he's asking his dad if you can stay in their shed for a few days. It's not much, but it's dry and has electricity." Mrs. Thomas reached out and took Dion's hand, her fingers cold against his skin. "You're an angel sent to us, do you know that? You and your mother and your friend." Dion felt his cheeks grow warm despite the chill in the air. "I just want to help." They ate in relative silence, the drumming of rain on the pavilion roof filling the space where conversation would normally be. Dion could see that both Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were exhausted, perhaps even ill from exposure to the elements. As they finished their meal, Dion made a decision. "I'm going to walk you to the shelter. It's not too far, and I've got an umbrella." Mr. Thomas began to protest, but a fit of coughing interrupted him. "Please," Dion said. "My mom would want me to make sure you get there safely." After a moment of silent communication between the elderly couple, Mrs. Thomas nodded. "If you're sure it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Dion assured them, though he knew his mom would worry if he was late getting home. He'd just have to text her and explain. They gathered the Thomases' few belongings, a small duffel bag, a plastic shopping bag containing what looked like important papers, and a worn photo album that Mrs. Thomas clutched protectively to her chest, even as Dion helped her to her feet. The walk to the shelter was slow and difficult. The wind had picked up, making it hard to keep the umbrella steady over all three of them. Mr. Thomas walked with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on his wife despite his obvious effort to hide his discomfort. By the time they reached the downtown area, Dion's arms ached from holding the umbrella, and all three were damp despite his best efforts. The shelter was a plain brick building with a simple sign reading, "Harbor Light Community Shelter," over the entrance. As they approached the door, Mrs. Thomas suddenly stopped. "What if they separate us again?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. Dion squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Mom said to ask for Mr. Jackson. He's the coordinator she knows. Just show him the note." Mr. Thomas straightened his shoulders, summoning dignity despite his bedraggled appearance. "We'll be fine, dear. This young man has done more than enough for us already." Dion hesitated, reluctant to leave them but knowing he needed to get home before his mom started to worry. "I'll come check on you tomorrow after school, okay?" Mrs. Thomas pulled him into a hug, her thin frame trembling slightly against him. "God bless you, child." Dion watched as they made their way inside, only turning to leave when the shelter door closed behind them. The walk home felt longer than usual, his mind full of worry for the Thomases and hope that the shelter coordinator would help them. When he finally reached his apartment building, soaked and chilled despite the umbrella, Dion was surprised to see an unfamiliar black car parked out front. Even more surprising was the tall man in an expensive suit standing in the building's entryway, sheltered from the rain. Dion slowed his steps, suddenly cautious. His mom always warned him about strangers, especially well-dressed ones who didn't seem to belong in their neighborhood. But as he got closer, the man looked up and their eyes met. There was something familiar about him, though Dion was certain they'd never met before. "Excuse me," the man said, his deep voice carrying easily over the sound of the rain. "Would you happen to be Dion?" Dion stopped at the bottom of the steps, maintaining a safe distance. "Who's asking?" The man smiled, and surprisingly it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made Dion relax slightly despite himself. "My name is Raymond Wilson," the man said, extending his hand. "And I've been hoping to meet you." Dion stared at the outstretched hand, his mom's warnings about strangers echoing in his mind. "How do you know my name?" Raymond Wilson lowered his hand, seemingly understanding the boy's caution. "That's a fair question. I've been watching you these past few days at the park with Mr. and Mrs. Thomas." A chill that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes ran down Dion's spine. "You've been watching us? Why?" "Not in a creepy way, I promise," Raymond said quickly, his expression earnest. "I happened to be driving by the park 3 days ago when I saw you sharing your lunch with them. It reminded me of something important. Something I'd forgotten." Dion shifted uncomfortably, still wary. "What was that?" Raymond's gaze drifted past Dion as if looking into the distant past. "When I was about your age, I lived in this neighborhood. My family didn't have much. Sometimes we didn't have enough to eat." His eyes refocused on Dion. "There was an old man who ran the corner store back then, Mr. Chen. He used to give me a sandwich whenever I came in, said it was a day old and he couldn't sell it anyway, but I knew he was just being kind." The rain continued to fall around them, but neither moved. Dion felt rooted to the spot, captivated by the story and the intensity in Raymond's eyes. "That kindness meant everything to me," Raymond continued. "It gave me hope when I needed it most. Watching you with the Thomases, I saw that same kindness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return." Dion wasn't sure what to say. The man's story seemed genuine, but something still felt off. "So why are you here? At my apartment building?" Raymond smiled again. "I'd like to talk to you and your mother if that's okay. I think I might be able to help the Thomases. Really help them." Before Dion could respond, he heard his name being called. He turned to see his mom hurrying toward them, concern etched on her face, an umbrella clutched in her hand. "Dion, where have you been? I've been calling you for an hour." She reached his side, instinctively putting herself between her son and the stranger. "Who is this?" "Mom, this is Mr. Wilson," Dion began, but Raymond stepped forward, offering his hand. "Raymond Wilson, ma'am. I apologize for alarming you. I was hoping to speak with you about your son's friends, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas." Dion's mom's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "How do you know about them?" "It's a long story," Raymond said, glancing at the rain still pouring down. "Perhaps we could talk inside? I promise I'm not here to cause any trouble." She hesitated, her protective instincts clearly at war with her curiosity. Finally, she nodded curtly. 15 minutes. That's all you get?" As they climbed the stairs to the third-floor apartment, Dion's mind raced. Who was this man, really? Could he actually help the Thomases? And if so, why would he bother? Once inside their small apartment, Dion's mom insisted he change into dry clothes while she made coffee. Raymond stood awkwardly in their living room, taking in the modest but clean and well-kept space. When Dion returned in dry sweatpants and a t-shirt, his mom was setting 3 mugs on the coffee table. "Now," she said, fixing Raymond with a direct stare, "explain why you've been watching my son." Raymond accepted the coffee gratefully, warming his hands around the mug. "As I was telling Dion, I grew up in this neighborhood. I was driving through a few days ago when I saw him sharing his lunch with an elderly homeless couple in the park. It touched me. Reminded me of someone who showed me kindness when I was a boy. So you followed my son." The edge in her voice could have cut glass. "Not exactly," Raymond replied, unruffled by her tone. "I had my assistant make some inquiries. I wanted to find out more about the couple and about Dion." "That doesn't sound any better," she said flatly. Raymond nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're right, and I apologize. It was presumptuous of me, but I had good intentions." He set his mug down and leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Taylor. Martha Taylor. Mrs. Taylor, I'm the CEO of Wilson Enterprises. We're a property development and investment company." He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a business card, offering it to her. She took it, studying it carefully before passing it to Dion. The card was heavy and embossed with a simple W logo. I came back to this neighborhood because we're looking at developing some properties here. Revitalization projects, but seeing your son's kindness to that couple reminded me of why I got into this business in the first place. Not just to make money, but to make a difference. Dion's mom's expression remained skeptical. What does this have to do with us or with the Thomases? Raymond smiled. Everything. You see, I'd like to help them. Really help them. Not just with temporary shelter, but with a permanent solution. And I'd like your son's input on how to do that. Dion leaned forward eagerly. You can really help them? Raymond nodded. I believe I can. But first, I need to know more about them. Where are they now? At the Harbor Light Shelter downtown, Dion answered. I just walked them there. Mr. Thomas wasn't feeling well. Concern flashed across Raymond's face. In this weather? How bad was he? He was coughing a lot, Dion admitted. And limping worse than usual. Raymond pulled out his phone. With your permission, I'd like to make a call. My company works with a medical outreach program. We could have a doctor check on them tonight. Dion looked at his mom, hope shining in his eyes. After a moment, she nodded. Go ahead. As Raymond stepped into the kitchen to make his call, Dion whispered to his mom. Do you think he's for real? She squeezed his hand. I don't know, baby. But that's a real business card, and he seems sincere. Let's hear him out. When Raymond returned, his expression was serious. I've arranged for a doctor to meet them at the shelter tonight. They'll get proper medical attention. He sat back down, looking at Dion. Now, I'd like to hear everything you know about the Thomases, how they lost their home, what skills they have, what they need. For the next half hour, Dion told Raymond everything he had learned about the elderly couple, about Mr. Thomas's career as a carpenter, Mrs. Thomas's work in the school cafeteria, their 3 children, their house on Maple Street that they had lost to foreclosure after medical bills piled up. Raymond listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just letting Dion talk. When the boy finally finished, Raymond sat back, a thoughtful expression on his face. Here's what I'm thinking, he said slowly. My company owns a small apartment building a few blocks from here. It's scheduled for renovation, but one of the ground floor units is already finished. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe, and accessible for people with mobility issues. Dion's eyes widened. You'd let them live there? Not just live there, Raymond clarified. Work there. Every building needs a maintenance person and someone to keep an eye on things. Mr. Thomas has carpentry skills. And even with his back issues, he could handle light maintenance. Mrs. Thomas could help with managing the building, collecting rent, handling tenant concerns, that sort of thing. You'd give them jobs too? Dion could hardly believe what he was hearing. Raymond nodded. It comes with the apartment. It wouldn't be a lot of money, but combined with their Social Security, it should be enough for them to live comfortably. Dion's mom, who had been quiet during most of the exchange, finally spoke up. Why would you do this for strangers? Raymond's expression turned serious. Because when I was a boy living in this neighborhood, people helped me when they didn't have to. That kindness changed my life. Now I'm in a position to do the same for others. He looked directly at Dion. And because your son reminded me of what's really important, it's not about how much money you make. It's about how you use it to make a difference. Dion felt a lump forming in his throat. When can they move in? I'll have the place ready by tomorrow afternoon, Raymond said. But there's something else I'd like to discuss with you both. Martha raised an eyebrow. What's that? I've been thinking about starting a community foundation here, focused on housing security and youth mentorship. I'd like Dion to be involved, if he's interested, of course. His perspective would be valuable, and it would be a great learning opportunity for him. Dion couldn't believe what he was hearing. Me, but I'm just a kid, Raymond smiled. Sometimes kids see things more clearly than adults do. You saw 2 people in need and you acted without hesitation. That's exactly the kind of thinking this foundation needs. Martha looked at her son, pride shining in her eyes. That would be Dion's decision, but I think it sounds like an amazing opportunity. Can I think about it? Dion asked, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by everything that was happening. Of course, Raymond said, standing up. Take all the time you need. For now, let's focus on the Thomases. Would you like to come with me tomorrow to tell them the news? Dion nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I definitely would. The next day was Saturday, and Dion could hardly sleep from excitement. By 9 o'clock, he was dressed and ready. waiting impatiently for Raymond's car to appear outside their building. When the black car finally pulled up, Dion was surprised to see not just Raymond but also a woman in a business suit sitting in the back seat with a folder of papers. "Good morning, Dion," Raymond greeted him as he slid into the car. "This is Ms. Patel, my company's legal counsel. She's prepared all the paperwork for the Thomases' new arrangement." The drive to the shelter was quick, with Raymond explaining more details about the apartment and jobs he was offering the elderly couple. "It's not charity," he emphasized. "They'll be providing a valuable service. I want them to feel useful and independent." When they arrived at the shelter, Dion led the way inside, searching anxiously for Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. He found them in the common area, sitting close together on a worn sofa. They looked rested but still tired, and Mr. Thomas had a hospital bracelet on his wrist. "Dion," Mrs. Thomas exclaimed when she spotted him. "We were hoping you'd come today. Are you okay?" Dion asked, looking at Mr. Thomas's bracelet with concern. The old man nodded. "Just a touch of pneumonia," they said. "Doctor came by last night, gave me some medicine. Feeling better already." Dion glanced back at Raymond, who smiled encouragingly. "Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, this is Mr. Wilson. He wants to talk to you about something important." As Raymond introduced himself and began explaining his proposal, Dion watched the expressions on the Thomases' faces shift from confusion to disbelief to cautious hope. "You're offering us a home and jobs?" Mrs. Thomas asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why would you do that for people you don't even know?" Raymond glanced at Dion before answering. "Because someone reminded me recently of the power of kindness, and because everyone deserves a second chance." Tears filled Mrs. Thomas's eyes as she reached for her husband's hand. "It seems too good to be true." "I assure you it's very real," Raymond said, gesturing to Ms. Patel, who opened her folder and began explaining the paperwork. As the adults discussed the details, Dion felt a strange mixture of emotions: joy for the Thomases, pride in his small part in helping them, and a sense of wonder at how quickly things had changed. Mr. Thomas seemed to sense his thoughts. While the others were reviewing the paperwork, he leaned over and whispered to Dion, "You know, son, they say when you give from your heart, it comes back to you multiplied. You shared your lunch with two old strangers, and look what happened." That afternoon, Dion stood with his mom, Raymond, and the Thomases outside a small brick apartment building. Raymond handed Mr. Thomas a key. "Welcome home," he said simply. As Mr. Thomas unlocked the door with shaking hands and he and his wife stepped inside their new apartment, Dion felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the sun now breaking through the clouds. Mrs. Thomas turned back, tears streaming down her face. "How can we ever thank you?"
"All of you?"
Dion thought for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe someday you can share your lunch with someone who needs it." Raymond placed a hand on Dion's shoulder. "I think that's the perfect answer." 2 weeks later, a small group gathered in the community center at Oakwood Park. Raymond stood at the front of the room, addressing the crowd. "Today I'm proud to announce the creation of the Oakwood Community Foundation," he said. "Our mission is to provide housing security and mentorship opportunities for this neighborhood. And I'm especially proud to introduce our Youth Advisory Board, led by someone who inspired this entire project with one simple act of kindness." Dion felt his face grow warm as Raymond gestured for him to join him at the front. His mom beamed from the audience, sitting next to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, who looked healthier and happier than Dion had ever seen them. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions," Raymond continued. "A shared lunch, a moment of connection, a reminder that we're all human, all deserving of dignity and care." As Dion looked out at the faces in the crowd, his mom, the Thomases, Tyler and his parents, neighbors he'd known all his life, and newcomers drawn by the promise of positive change, he realized that his simple act of kindness had created ripples far beyond anything he could have imagined. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning.